They were just three silhouettes on a lonely ridge at dusk, a frail old man, a restless younger figure, and a silent black Mustang standing watch. No one else was there to see what happened next. No witnesses, except the horse. When the sun stepped closer, voice low, eyes cold, the wind stilled. And as the father's cane slipped from his grip, the Mustang moved. What followed wasn't instinct. It was something far deeper, something no one in Lone Ridge would ever forget. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe. There are certain towns where summer doesn't just arrive. It settles in like a punishment pressing down, with a weight that turns even the air into something thick and heavy. Lone Ridge, Montana in July was one of those places. The sky blazed mercilessly above the cracked land. The sun carved sharp lines of shadow across the dry, brittle ground. Grasses that had once been green now bristled gold, and the only movement came from the insects, humming low in the brush, or from the slow groaning shift of weathered boards in the old horse barn. On the very edge of town, set apart by a faded split-rail fence and a line of parched cottonwoods, stood Callahan Ranch. It looked as if the earth itself was trying to reclaim it. The house, once proud, now stooped and silvered by decades of wind, sagged under the Montana sun. A windmill with broken blades marked the boundary between home and wilderness, but it hadn't spun in years. The fence had long since surrendered its straightness. Only two figures still belonged to this place, a man whose shadow stretched long and thin at dusk, and a horse whose patience had outlasted time itself. Samuel "Sam" Callahan, at age 90, limped along the porch, leaning heavily on his handmade wooden cane. His shoulders were broad but bent, as if the years themselves pressed down on him, and one leg dragged just a little, muscles withered and uneven from an old wound that had never truly healed. His skin was the color of worn leather, marked by sun and wind and memory. Eyes gray as winter sage still held a spark, but their focus often drifted far beyond the barn, far beyond the ridge, searching for something he'd lost long ago. Sam was a veteran, one of the oldest living sons of the Iraq War, though he rarely spoke of it. He lived without smartphone, without internet, without television. A battered old radio was his only concession to modernity. Each morning and evening, he'd make his slow rounds of the ranch, with that cane in one hand, the other hand absently brushing a fence post or checking if the water trough was full. People in Lone Ridge called him Old Man Callahan, the one who talks to his horse. They spoke with a kind of small-town respect tinged with pity, touched by a hint of suspicion. What they didn't understand, what nobody really saw, was that for Sam, the ranch was already a ghost town. His family had gone, friends were buried or scattered, and only the horse Ash remained. In Sam's quiet world, Ash was not just a horse, he was kin, the only witness to everything the old man had endured and lost. Ash was a Mustang, once a wild thing, with a coat dark as burnt earth, legs corded, and strong eyes as keen as a hawk's. Now he was old, but there was still an elegance in the way he moved, a dignity that age could not erase. Sam had found him years before, orphaned and near death, after a brutal roundup outside the county line. Sam had brought the trembling foal home, nursed him with patience and quiet hands. Over time, the Mustang learned to trust and then to love. He could nudge open the latch on the barn door, recognize Sam's limp from halfway across the yard, and would often stand at the fence each afternoon waiting for the old man to finish his rounds. There were no words between them, but there didn't need to be. A look, a touch, the simple presence of another living soul, these were the threads that bound them. In Ash's deep brown eyes, Sam sometimes thought he saw all the things he had lost: his wife's laughter, his daughter's first step, a whole lifetime's worth of memories sealed away by time and regret. 15 years ago, life had already begun to take its toll. Sam's wife Laura was diagnosed with late-stage cancer. He'd done everything he could, sold off old rifles, the last working tractor, even his father's gold watch. At night, he'd take odd jobs in town, hauling sacks at the grain depot, fixing a fence here and there, working himself to exhaustion just to keep up with mounting bills. But it was never enough. One evening, after a day spent in the waiting room at the VA hospital, Sam signed a piece of paper that would haunt him forever, a refusal for a costly new treatment, the only option left beyond hope and means. He'd wept quietly on a bench outside, careful not to let the nurses see. Laura died at home on their old wooden bed. She squeezed Sam's hand and whispered, "I don't blame you, but you have to live." After her funeral, the house felt unbearably empty. The kitchen echoed with silence. Sam packed a bag, and at an age when most men would be counting their grandchildren, he enlisted again. No one understood. Not his neighbors, not his daughter, not even himself. But Sam believed foolishly, desperately, that if he couldn't save his own family, maybe he could save someone else's. War gave him no redemption. In Iraq, the lines between good and evil blurred fast. On a night thick with desert dust and panic, Sam was just a few feet away when two young soldiers were killed by a roadside bomb. He could see their faces every time he closed his eyes, their last words, their calls for help that came too late. "If I can't save the ones I love," he'd told himself, "I'll save whoever I can." But the world wasn't interested in giving him that kind of peace. When Sam came back, he was a different man, even if nobody could see it at first. He spoke little, ate less, and sat for long hours on the porch staring at the horizon with Ash standing silent in the shade of the barn. Sleep was rare. He'd jolt awake at the sound of thunder or the snap of a screen door. PTSD, the town doctor called it, and suggested Sam visit the new therapist over in Red Lodge. Sam just shook his head. Things that happen in war, he'd say, belong to the war. The rest of us, if we make it out, just have to learn how to carry them. Night was always the hardest. Sometimes in the gray before dawn, Sam would see Laura in a dream, standing at the ranch gate, her back to him, her voice soft but stern. "You weren't strong enough, Sam," she'd say, her eyes glistening with accusation and love. "You let me go." On other nights, he was back in the desert, crawling through smoke and rubble, hearing the desperate cries of young men he could not save. He'd wake up drenched in sweat, hands gripping the bed frame, heart pounding in his chest like a hammer. On those nights, he'd rise, pull on his boots, and make his way cane in hand across the yard to the barn. Ash would already be waiting, nose poking through the fence, breath warm in the cold air. Sam would lean his forehead against the horse's broad neck, letting his trembling hand rest against Ash's mane. For a moment, the nightmares would fade. The ranch was real. He was real. Ash, for his part, seemed to understand. He would nuzzle Sam's chest, exhaling gently, as if asking another bad dream. His big, dark eyes reflected a depth of sympathy that needed no words. Sam would smile, weak but grateful. In the hush of the barn, with dust swirling in the moonlight, the two old souls would stand together, each finding comfort in the other's quiet company. Outside, the land waited for rain that never came, and the ranch dozed beneath the weight of 100 lost summers. But within its weathered fences, Sam and Ash carried each other forward, one step, one day, one memory at a time. In a world determined to forget them, they chose instead to remember. It was late afternoon, but the sun over Lone Ridge had lost none of its bite. The heat draped itself over the land, pressing every shadow flat, turning the world a hard, blinding gold. Sam Callahan sat on the porch of his faded ranch house, the old wooden rocker creaking beneath him as he caught his breath after checking the fences. The world was still, as if holding its own breath, when a faint metallic squeal carried through the air, the sound of hinges on the ranch gate. Sam's hand went up to shade his eyes. A figure was coming down the long dirt track, shoulders squared, head bowed beneath a sun-bleached baseball cap. Even at a distance, the way the man moved, deliberate, but not hurried like someone approaching a crossroads with no map, was instantly achingly familiar. He didn't need to squint. He knew those steps, knew the broad frame, the stoop of a man who had carried too much on his back for too long. Jack Callahan, his son, the boy he hadn't seen in over 10 years. Time seemed to pause, a heavy silence settling over the house, the yard, even the old windmill that never spun anymore. Jack was about 45 now, and the years had not been gentle with him. He was taller than Sam remembered, or maybe just thinner, lean from labor, his shoulders still broad, but his body weathered by a life that had offered little rest. His skin was darkened by sun, and his face was all sharp angles and shadows, jaw set, hard eyes tired and wary. There was a restlessness in the way he kept his hands in his pockets, a posture that said, "I've been on the move so long, I've forgotten how to stand still." His jeans were faded almost white at the knees, and dust clung to his boots. The denim shirt hung loose, a little too big, as if he'd lost weight he couldn't spare. His eyes stayed on the ground most of the way up the drive, then flicked briefly to the old house, the barn, the familiar fence posts. It was clear he wasn't just a visitor. He was someone returning to a place he'd been forced to leave behind, carrying with him the scars of distance and years. Sam levered himself up from the rocking chair, wincing as he put weight on his bad leg. He gripped the cane, grounding himself against the porch boards, and waited until the distance between them closed to 10 paces, then 5. "Jack." The word came out low, almost lost in the cicadas and the dry whisper of wind. It was not a greeting, not a shout of joy or welcome. Just a name spoken as if it hurt to say. Jack stopped, lifted his head for the first time. For a moment their eyes met. No smile, no rush forward, just a silent exchange of history, both men blinking against the glare, each wondering what the other saw. "I was passing through," Jack said, voice hoarse but steady. "Had some business up near Sheridan." He let the words hang there, not quite an apology, not quite a lie. Sam nodded. Long drive from Sheridan for just passing through. Jack's lips twitched at the corners. Was it annoyance, resentment? It vanished too quickly to say. Figured I'd see if the place was still standing. The air between them was charged, dense with everything that had never been spoken. Neither moved. Sam didn't reach out, didn't offer a hand or a hug, didn't even gesture toward the porch. He was afraid, he realized, of one more rejection, one more wordless reminder that time had changed more than just the lines on their faces. From the shadows beside the barn, Ash watched the reunion. The old Mustang's ears pricked forward, nostrils flared. He stood perfectly still, head, high legs, planted as if ready for anything. When Jack stepped closer to the house, Ash's body tensed. He took a small, deliberate step backward, and the faint tap of hoof on dry earth sharp in the silence. Sam glanced over his shoulder at the horse, then back at his son. "Seems he remembers you." Jack followed his gaze, and for the first time, something shifted in his expression. A half-smile, cold and almost mocking, flickered. "That damn horse still around. Guess you treated him better than you ever treated me." Sam said nothing. He didn't flinch, didn't defend himself. The silence that followed was loud enough to drown out the cicadas. It said more than either man was ready to admit. Jack's eyes went hard again. He swept his gaze over the ranch barn corral, the rusted windmill, all the stubborn remains of a family's hard work. He looked as if he might ask something or maybe curse, but instead he turned away. Sam spoke, voice measured. "You want to come inside?" Jack shook his head. "Not staying long. Just wanted to see if you were still breathing." The words were harsh, but there was a crack in them, a hesitation that softened the edge. Sam accepted the answer. "Still breathing." There was a pause. Jack's eyes drifted around the yard, the memories rising and receding like a tide he didn't want to admit he missed. The old porch swing, the place where he'd skinned his knee at age 7. The pile of wood by the fence where his mother used to stack kindling. Sam tried again cautiously. "You got family," Jack's jaw tightened. Not a topic worth talking about. Another nod from Sam. He understood if a question needed to be asked, it meant the answer wasn't ready to be given. He leaned back against the porch post, letting the silence stretch between them. The quiet wasn't empty. It was alive, filled with the sounds of the ranch and the afternoon pressing on. A crow called somewhere up in the cottonwoods. The breeze rattled the corrugated tin on the barn roof. Ash shifted his weight, huffed and flicked his tail, the movement drawing both men's attention for a brief, shared second. For several minutes, neither father nor son spoke. The sky impossibly wide arched above them. Shadows grew longer, dust floated on the air, the sun burned gold against the faded paint of the house. It was the kind of silence that only comes after years of noise, after arguments and goodbyes and slammed doors. It was heavy, yes, but it was also a strange kind of relief, the relief of not having to perform, of letting old wounds breathe. Jack finally broke the stillness, his voice softer now. "You keep this place up by yourself best I can," Sam said. Not much left to fall apart. Jack made a small, grudging sound of acknowledgement. He didn't say he was impressed. He didn't say he was sorry. He let his eyes settle on Ash again, and for a moment the old Mustang returned his stare with a kind of stern accusation, as if asking, "Why did you stay away so long?" Jack looked away first. Sam eased himself down into the porch chair, groaning quietly as his hips settled. He gestured with his cane toward a second chair, but Jack remained standing, shifting from foot to foot. "Sit if you want," Sam offered. "I'm good." Jack's gaze wandered back to the road, as if already halfway gone. Sam shrugged. "Suit yourself." The silences continued, filling up with all the things they were not saying. "I missed you. Why didn't you write? Did you ever forgive me? Are you ever coming home?" They sat with those words in their mouths, unspoken and sharp, like the taste of iron after biting your tongue. Jack picked at a flake of dried mud on his boot. "Never thought you'd last this long," he said as if talking to the ground. "Not out here, not alone." Sam looked up, an edge in his voice. "Figured stubbornness runs in the family." Jack huffed, not quite a laugh. "Guess so." The sun kept falling, shadows stretching across the yard. A few more crows cawed, and somewhere a dog barked. Sam thought of all the evenings he'd spent alone on this porch, watching the world fade to blue, never daring to hope his son might appear at the end of the drive. Now that Jack was here, he found himself wishing he had something wise to say, something that might close the gap. But every time he reached for words, they crumbled in his mind. He settled for truth. Never was good at talking. Jack let that settle between them. He took a deep breath, as if testing the air. Maybe talking's overrated. Sam smiled just barely. Maybe so. Ash walked over then, as if drawn by the lowering sun or the gravity of old men and old wounds. He stopped a few feet from Jack, watching, waiting, weighing the world as only a Mustang can. Jack met his gaze, then looked away, shuffling his boots in the dust. "I should go," Jack said. "You just got here?" Sam replied, not accusing, just stating a fact. Jack shrugged, like he'd shrugged off every disappointment the world had thrown his way. "Didn't say I was staying." Sam nodded once, then looked out at the fields, at the place where the grass had died, and come back so many times it didn't know how to quit. He wondered if it was hope or just habit that kept him here, waiting for a son who never promised to return. Jack hesitated. He wanted to say something. Sam could feel it in the way his son's shoulders squared, the way his jaw worked. But whatever it was, it died before reaching his lips. Father and son sat beneath the creaking porch, the shadows pooling at their feet, the barn and the horse and the empty house behind them. They didn't talk about the years lost or about the reasons why. But the sound of the wind, the distant call of birds, the measured breathing of Ash as he stood guard, all of these filled the space between them, reminding them that sometimes forgiveness begins with simply sharing the same quiet. For now, that would have to be enough. The sun was not yet low, but its light was already turning heavy, a thick gold slanting sideways across the ranch. Sam Callahan stood up, pressing both hands on his cane, and turned to his son. The porch boards creaked as he shifted his weight. "I still climb up the ridge every weekend," he said, voice gravelly but steady. "From there, you can see all of Lone Ridge." Jack, who had been resting a shoulder against the porch post, didn't move. His face betrayed nothing, but his eyes flickered with something uncertain, maybe skepticism, maybe memory. "You still got the legs for that?" he asked. Sam managed a brittle laugh, dry as dust. "Climb slower these days. But I still climb." A brief silence fell, long enough for the afternoon to stretch and settle. Jack didn't say yes, didn't say no. But after a moment, he gave a slight nod, a surrender less of enthusiasm and more of inevitability. "There are some invitations you refuse by refusing to answer, but not this one." Sam had already begun to shuffle toward the back gate, cane tapping out a measured rhythm on the hard-pan dirt. Jack followed a few paces behind, hands stuffed deep in his pockets, boots scuffing up little puffs of red dust. The trail behind Callahan Ranch was little more than a gash of exposed earth winding up the bald ridge. Weeds and wild grass scratched at their ankles, rocks littered the path, and the sun found every patch of exposed skin. Sam walked in front slower than Jack remembered, but there was still a stubborn pride in the way he kept moving, his back hunched but his head high. Jack followed at a measured distance, gazed down, lost in a tangle of memory and present discomfort. Neither man spoke. There was only the steady thump of Sam's cane, the crunch of Jack's boots, the rasp of dry wind. Each step was a small act of endurance, not just for the body, but for everything that had gone unsaid between them. Behind them, silent as a shadow, Ash had left the barn and begun to follow. The old Mustang kept a patient, measured distance, hooves falling soft on the earth. No one called to him. No one had to. It was as if the animal sensed that something was shifting, something brittle and dangerous, and he intended to be there, whatever happened. The climb steepened near a long abandoned oak clinging to the hillside. Sam paused, leaning into his cane, and pointed. "When you were 8, you hid up there for half a day with a can of beans and a comic book. Nearly gave your mother a heart attack." Jack's mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. He glanced at the oak, its branches stunted and twisted roots wrapped around a tumble of rocks, and the memory came back sharp as sunlight through leaves. He didn't reply. Sam went on, his tone gentler. "I looked for you until dark. Found you asleep on a bed of roots. Your mother cried. I just got mad. Thought you were ignoring me on purpose." The wind sighed through the dry grass. Jack looked away, lips pressed into a thin line. Sam drew a shaky breath as if gathering strength. "I remember you wanted to be a fireman, then a cowboy, then a doctor. Changed your mind every week." A sharp sound escaped Jack, a short, humorless snort. "Didn't end up being any of those, did I?" Sam stopped walking, turned to face his son. "I never said that. I just remember. You used to dream big is all." Jack didn't answer. He stared at the ground, jaw tight, as if daring any more memories to surface. The air between them grew tense, electric, with the friction of old wounds. All the while, Ash brought up the rear, matching their pace exactly as if he'd done this climb 1,000 times. His ears swiveled with every word, every shift in tone. He watched Jack carefully, not quite trusting, not quite ready to look away. Every time Jack paused, Ash would pause too, hooves silent. He never drew closer than a few yards, but he never let the gap grow wide. There was a sense in the animal's eyes, a patience, a vigilance, as if he knew there were knives in the air, hidden in hearts. Sam didn't look back, but he seemed to feel Ash's gaze. "He always knows when someone's hiding a blade," he said quietly, not quite joking. They kept moving. The climb was not long, but for Sam, it was hard work. He stopped to catch his breath by a section of old fence, the wires sagging and posts half-rotted. "This is where you broke your arm," he said. "You were 10. Tried to race Ash downhill, but you tripped. Your mother chewed me out for a week for letting you run wild." Jack looked down at his wrist at a faded scar only he remembered. "You weren't good at being a father." He said the words clipped and low, but too honest to take back. Sam's mouth tightened, but he nodded. "No, I wasn't. I thought if I didn't hurt you, I must be doing all right." Jack's voice was sharper now. "Not all wounds come from fists, you know." They stood for a moment, the silence jagged as broken glass. Sam bowed his head, then set off again. Neither spoke, but something shifted in the air, small but undeniable, in the way Jack squared his shoulders, in the way Sam glanced at him, furtive and afraid. The last stretch to the top was the hardest. Jack raised his head, letting the sun sting his eyes. The light scattered through the branches of a dead tree just as memories scattered through his mind. He saw flashes his mother's laughter as she rolled pie dough in the kitchen, his father's rough hands steadying him on a bareback pony, the ache in his chest the day Sam left for the army a second time. He remembered sleeping on the barn floor with Ash lying just on the other side of the rails, his warm breath keeping the monsters away. He remembered his father's silhouette by the door, the words unsaid, the hugs withheld. He remembered with bitterness the day the army truck came for Sam, and how no one explained why a horse got a goodbye and he didn't. He had never said any of this out loud. They reached the crest, a bald spot on the ridge, with a boulder shaped like a chair. Below them, Lone Ridge was a model village. On the white-steepled church, the old bakery, a parched ball field, everything familiar and impossibly far away. Sam sat first, lowering himself gingerly onto the boulder, breath coming hard. "I come up here when I miss your mother," he said simply. Jack stood a few feet behind his shadow, falling over Sam's shoulders. The view was beautiful, peaceful, yet the space between the two men was anything but. Sam broke the hush, still looking out over town. "Every time I sit up here, I ask myself, what did I ever really give my son?" Jack's chest tightened. He said nothing, but his pulse thudded hard in his ears. He sensed that Sam was approaching something dangerous, a place neither of them had ever dared to go. Sam's voice dropped fragile and clear. "I'm not scared of dying. I'm scared of dying before I say what needs saying." Jack's reply was barely more than a whisper. "It's not too late." What he didn't say was, "I'm not sure I'm ready to hear it." They sat in the long shadow of the ridge, the silence stretching. Ash found a patch of grass a little distance away and grazed, keeping both men in his periphery, as if standing guard over an ancient, invisible battlefield. Sam's hands trembled on his cane. "When your mother got sick, I thought I could fix it. I always thought if I worked hard enough, if I made the right sacrifices, everything would turn out. But it didn't." Jack looked away, jaw clenching. He wanted to rage, to say, "You left me too." not just once, but over and over. First for the hospital, then for the war, and every time you chose something else. Instead, he stayed silent, letting the ache settle into his bones. The wind rose, rattling the dead branches. The weight of memory, regret, forgiveness, none of it could be resolved here. But maybe it could be faced. Sam drew a shaky breath. I don't want to go to my grave thinking I never said what matters. Jack turned, sunlight burning his eyes. Then say it. Sam met his gaze. I'm sorry, Jack. I should have said it a long time ago, but I didn't know how. Jack's face twisted, half in anger, half in relief. I never wanted much, you know. Just for you to be there. Not for the horse. For me. Sam blinked hard. I know. And I failed. The words were not enough. But now at least they had been spoken. And in that, there was a beginning. The ridge had always felt high above the world. Windswept, raw, eternal. But in the last hour of sunlight, its silence took on a new kind of heaviness. Sam sat on the big stone that looked down over Lone Ridge elbows. On knees, silver hair fluttering faintly with every passing breeze. The ranch and the little town beyond seemed peaceful, almost holy in the fading light. Down below the church's white spire caught the sun, the bakery's sign tilted lazily over the sidewalk, and a dirt road wandered off toward the old ball field. The peace of it all clung to the air like a fragile spell. Peaceful up here, isn't it? Sam said, voice steady but distant. He didn't turn around to see if Jack was listening. Jack stood a few steps back, hands shoved deep in his pockets, gaze fixed somewhere beyond the rooftops and sun-baked earth. His jaw worked, the line of his mouth drawn tight with thoughts that had nowhere safe to land. Peaceful always goes hand in hand with poverty, Dad. His words hung sharp, a blade's edge in the quiet. You ever notice that Sam didn't rise to the bait? He let out a slow, tired sigh. The difference between them, father and son, 2 generations, rang out in the silence between their words. The land below to Sam was memory and home. To Jack, it was a prison in golden light. A few moments passed. Then, in a gesture that felt rehearsed and yet utterly desperate, Jack pulled a battered leather folder from the back pocket of his jeans. He hesitated, fingers lingering for an instant too long, before opening it and pulling out a folded sheaf of papers. The wind threatened to catch the corner of the page, but his grip was white-knuckled. He stepped forward and extended the contract toward Sam. The solar company out of Billings has agreed to the price, Jack said, voice hard. Just needs your signature. The world seemed to hold its breath. Even the grass stilled. Sam didn't move. He looked at the contract, at Jack's hand, then up at his son's face. His own voice, when it came, was a careful monotone, measured but quivering ever so slightly beneath the surface. This is your mother's land. Your grandfather's land, he said, every word heavy with 1,000 memories. Jack's lips pressed together. It's dead land. No one can farm it. No one's left to inherit it. Why are you hanging on? Sam shook his head, slow and deliberate, refusing to take the contract from Jack's hand. So there's a place to bury myself. And all these memories, things you've never cared for. The wind picked up, lifting a curl of Sam's hair. Jack's eyes flashed with something raw pain or rage, it was hard to tell. You picked that horse over your own son. Don't talk to me about memories, he spat. Sam's hands rested on his knees. He didn't answer. For a long, brittle moment, father and son faced each other, neither willing to blink first. The space between them was thick with old wounds and fresh betrayals. Jack's breathing quickened. Sweat prickled at his temples, running down past his jaws even as the evening breeze cooled. In his mind, images flickered like a broken reel. His wife's suitcase rolling down the steps, bank letters piling up his name, scrawled across eviction notices. Every door that had slammed in his face echoed now, bouncing off the hard stone and emptiness of the ridge. He looked at his father, at the old man who seemed so immovable, so certain a monument of hard lessons and old stubbornness. Jack's hand crumpled the edge of the contract. His lips quivered. Tears blurred the edges of his vision. Anger, frustration, the kind of pain that lives too long in the chest. All he'd ever wanted was to break through, to be seen, to matter. Sam spoke without looking up. "You think the only thing I've held on to is this land? You're wrong. It's the last thing left, holding my heart together." Jack forced a deep breath. He pulled the contract back, shoving it into his pocket, his movements sharp and jittery. He started forward slow at first, boots scraping over dry dirt and gravel, the sound much louder than it should have been. Each step shrank the distance between him and his father. A new wind stirred swirling dust and grass around their feet. Far behind, Ash had stopped mid-step, ears pricked forward, his body taut with a sudden alertness. Jack's shoes ground against the stone as he drew close, only a couple of paces now. Sam didn't move, didn't look. His eyes were closed, face tilted toward the last warmth of the sun. "You think you're the only one who lost something?" Jack's voice trembled. Sam's hands closed in his lap. "No, but it's the only thing I have left to lose." Jack lifted his right hand, not even sure what he intended. Maybe steady himself on the stone. Maybe something else darker, unthinkable. His breath came in short, hard bursts. The moment trembled, stretched tight, ready to snap. And then a scream of hooves, sharp as thunder. Ash burst up the ridge from behind a streak of dark muscle and a wild mane, nostrils flaring, eyes burning. The Mustang's charge was sudden, electric, a storm breaking over still water. Jack spun at the noise, but not fast enough. Ash slammed his great shoulder into Jack's upper arm, not to maim, but with all the strength needed to knock a grown man off balance. Jack went down, legs buckling hand, flying forward to break the fall. His head hit the brittle grass and rough stones, a flare of pain sparking in his temple. Sam's startled instinct forcing him to his feet. His cane slipped away, clattering against the rock. For a heartbeat, he could only stare, eyes wide, lungs forgotten. Ash spun on his own hooves, placing himself squarely between the two men. He planted his feet, head high, chest heaving, every muscle quivering. The Mustang's breath came in powerful bursts, a living engine, the sound echoing off stone and silence alike. Jack sat down hard in legs, giving out beneath him the shock of what he'd almost done, still vibrating through his bones. His hands pressed into the dirt behind him, fingers curling around grass and stone as if bracing against a world suddenly too heavy to hold. For the first time since he was a boy, Jack didn't care who saw him like this, shoulders shaking, face crumpled, armor cracked wide open. In the orange light of evening, he was not the bitter wandering man who had come home to settle a score. He was just a lost son, worn thin by the road, exhausted by carrying everything alone for far too long. His breath hitched, not quite a sob, but close. And when he finally found his voice, it was the voice of a man speaking through the last of his pride. "I got nothing left," Dad Jack whispered, staring at the dust between his boots. "No house, no money. Lisa's gone, took the kids. I'm buried in debt, feels like snakes wrapping around my chest every night. I can't breathe." He rubbed a trembling hand over his face, feeling the new creases etched there. Creases not of age, but of despair. Fear, the kind of pain that eats you up slowly from the inside out. "I went to the bank," he said, voice growing rough. "Tried to get a loan in your name. They laughed me out the door, said the ranch isn't even mine. So I thought." He swallowed hard. "I thought if you wouldn't help me live, maybe you'd leave me something when you're gone. Something to make the misery worth it." The words were acid. Jack squeezed his eyes shut, blinking against the tears stinging there. He had meant to hold it all in, had meant to be cold, strong, ruthless. Instead, the truth spilled out raw and ugly too, honest to take back. He lifted his head, face blotched and eyes rimmed red. You always loved that horse more than me. You held him when he was sick. You taught him patience, gave him treats. When I fell off and cried, you yelled at me, "Don't you dare cry, you're a Callahan." Jack's voice caught. I hated you for it. Still do sometimes. But I hate myself more because after all this, after everything, I still came back. The confession hung in the evening air, brittle and unforgiving. Jack let it stay there unchallenged for once, refusing to hide behind anger or sarcasm. He hunched his shoulders, waiting for the scolding he'd heard 100 times as a boy, or maybe for the final blow that would drive him away for good. Sam didn't speak right away. He stood, one hand resting lightly on his cane, the other hanging at his side. His gaze was steady, soft, older than the hills, full of something Jack could not name. The silence lengthened, but it was no longer full of tension. It was simply the silence of two souls finding the bottom at last. Then at length Sam said, "You're not the only one who thought you'd been left behind." His words were slow measured, like stones placed carefully one by one. I watched your mother die on that old bed of ours. Watched the doctor shake his head, watched her hold my hand, and I couldn't do a thing. Couldn't pay the bills, couldn't save her. His eyes clouded, seeing again what only he had seen. She said, "Sam, you have to live, even if I'm not here." But I couldn't. Not really. Not after she was gone. He paused, shoulders drooping. So I ran. I signed up for another tour, old as I was, broken as I was. Not to be a hero. Just to get away from the ache in this house, from the memory of her smile, her voice. I thought if I could save someone over there, it would make up for all the times I failed here. Sam looked up the setting sun, catching in the lines of his face. I didn't hold you when you fell, because I was scared. If I loved you soft, if I let myself care out loud, and then losing you would finish me. So I told you to stand up, to act tough. I was trying to teach you how to survive me. He gripped his cane knuckles white. But that's not love. That's fear. And it made you grow up thinking you had to fight for every scrap. Jack stared, silent, unable to look away. Sam's voice grew faint. The war didn't fix anything. I watched men burn, watched boys I trained scream my name, and I couldn't save them. I wake up some nights still smelling smoke. Your mother's eyes in that photograph on the mantel, they watch me every time I walk in the door. He swallowed. I was a lousy father. But I never stopped thinking about you. Not one damn day. For a moment, neither moved. The world seemed to shrink to the rim of that ridge, and the rocky ground, and the last glimmer of daylight, the old Mustang in the background, standing silent as a statue. Both men, battered by years of silence, by wounds they'd each tried to outrun, were now finally hopelessly face to face with the truth. They were both just trying to survive the pieces of their own broken hearts. The air between them was no longer heavy with judgment, but with a strange, gentle understanding. A knowing born of pain and distance, and a longing for something that had never been given words. Jack's vision cleared. For the first time, he saw his father not as a monument or an enemy, but as a tired, wounded man who had done the best he could and sometimes failed. Sam lowered his cane and with effort lowered himself to sit beside Jack. He didn't reach out, didn't pat his shoulder, just sat close enough that Jack could feel the warmth radiating from him, a presence that spoke in its quiet way of a kind of love neither of them had ever dared say aloud. Sam's voice was softer now, almost a whisper. "You think you came back to forgive me, Jack? But maybe you needed to forgive yourself first. Jack swallowed hard, the tears coming easier now. Maybe, he said, voice trembling. Maybe I needed both. A long breath passed between them, and neither man tried to fill it with words. The last of the sunlight grazed their faces, painting deep shadows on the rocks and on the tired, open faces of two men who for a lifetime had only ever known how to hide. Behind them, Ash had watched everything unfold. The old Mustang stood for a while, motionless, head held high. Then, as the hush stretched and softened, he moved forward, hooves soundless on the brittle grass. He stopped just behind Jack, then bent his neck with slow, deliberate care, brushing the tip of his velvety nose against Jack's shoulder. Jack jumped at the touch, startled, then looked back. Ash's eyes were steady, unblinking, wide, with something that could only be called forgiveness. The horse lingered for a moment, then pressed his head closer, exhaling softly, a warm, living presence in a world gone cold. Jack's face crumpled. He didn't sob, didn't wail. He just let the tears fall silent and hot, dripping from his chin onto his dusty jeans. He reached up with a shaking hand and rested it on Ash's neck, feeling the old scars and the heat of living muscle beneath the hide. The touch grounded him, drew him back from the brink of despair. Sam watched, eyes shining with tears of his own. He forgives before I ever could, Sam said, voice breaking just a little. Animals know things we forget. The moment lingered. The ridge, which had felt like the edge of the world, now felt like a place of shelter. Not yet home, but no longer exile. They sat that way for a long time, Jack and Sam on the edge of the world, Ash curled behind them, like a blanket stitched from all the years of pain and survival. No one spoke. The only sounds were the steady breathing of the Mustang and the sigh of wind through dry grass, and at last the ragged breath of two men who had finally dared to let go. The sky faded from gold to blue to the deep purple of coming night. The world below them glimmered with the first lights of Lone Ridge, small, steadfast reminders that life continued even after everything else had broken down. Sam finally spoke, his voice steady again. If you want to start over, this land is still here, and I'm still breathing. Jack turned, searching his father's face for sarcasm, for judgment. There was none, only a tired, sincere offer. He didn't nod, didn't shake his head. But his eyes at last were clear, focused, alive, even if only with the faintest spark of hope. That was enough. That was all a man needed sometimes to take the first step out of the darkness. They didn't get up right away. They didn't rush back down the ridge. Instead, they stayed silent together, while the world spun and the Mustang, too old to care about pride or shame, stretched out behind them, a living, breathing link between the past and the uncertain future. And so it was, as dusk turned to night, that a father and a son who had both lost everything and almost lost each other found, for a moment at least, that they were not as alone as they'd believed. There was no miracle, no grand pronouncement, only the quiet, stubborn presence of family scarred, surviving and maybe willing to try again. Evening was falling gently over Lone Ridge, soft as a prayer. The last honeyed rays of sun slid across the roofs, gilding the dust that always hung in the air and painting long, wavering shadows on the cracked red road. It was the kind of evening when the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a sign, a word, a reconciliation. Down that lonely road to Callahan Ranch, three figures walked side by side, one old one, not young, one horse. Their silhouettes stretched and mingled together, an unspoken story in motion. Jack walked on the right shoulders, rounded his steps, both purposeful and heavy, as if every stride was a form of penance. Sam moved slower now, his cane tapping the earth in a steady rhythm, each footfall an echo of years survived and stubbornness endured. In the middle, Ash paced between them, neither hurrying nor lagging, head-high gait, measured the very picture of calm. Sometimes the Mustang would turn an ear to Sam's uneven breathing, or glance sidelong at Jack, who kept glancing at the ground, lost in thought. They said nothing to each other, but in their silence was the sound of forgiveness, thick as the dust that billowed around their boots. Each step pressed something old and broken into the ground. Each step was an apology, a promise, a prayer for things finally mended. The wooden fence posts that lined the road, half rotted and leaning, seemed to lean closer as they passed, as if listening in. Old stones remembered bare feet and young laughter. The cottonwoods nodded their leaves, shivering at the hush that traveled ahead of the three. Even the wind, usually restless, drifted only occasionally through the yellowing grass, reluctant to disturb this strange, sacred procession. As the trio neared the edge of the ranch, something subtle shifted. One by one, the people of Lone Ridge began to appear at the roadside, not called, not summoned, just drawn by the quiet gravity of the moment. The blacksmith wiped the sweat from his brow, set down his hammer, and pulled off his battered cap, his hands twisting it in silence. Across the way, the baker rested her tray of steaming bread on the open window ledge, letting the scent of yeast and comfort spill out into the street. A little boy, in the midst of kicking a ball against the barn, froze in place, the ball rolling away as he tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Ma, who's that man walking with old Mr. Callahan?" His mother didn't answer right away. She watched Jack for a long moment, and recognition dawning. "That's someone who left a long time ago," she whispered, brushing the boy's hair from his forehead. "He's come home now." No one shouted or pointed or called out. There was no laughter, no applause, only the careful watching of many eyes, each gaze its own benediction, its own reckoning. They'd all heard the stories, the reasons, the rumors. They knew of Jack's leaving, some said in anger, some said in shame. They knew of Sam's stubborn solitude, his conversations with a horse, his unwillingness to ever close the front gate at night. But now, as the three moved closer, the town understood without words something precious had been saved. Miss Ellie, who had run the town library for 40 years, stood alone at the wooden archway that marked the entrance to Callahan Ranch. She wore her usual sun hat and a faded dress, one hand curled around the cracked spine of a book she'd read 100 times. When Ash passed, she bowed her head, not out of fear, not even out of respect for the animal itself, but for the mystery, the something more that shimmered in the air. Her lips moved softly, a whisper, meant for herself and for everyone at once. "That horse isn't just a horse. There's a soul inside him." No one mocked her, and no one smiled. Because they too had seen the look in Ash's eyes, the depth, the sorrow, the strange patient mercy. It was the kind of thing you didn't talk about in the daylight, the kind of thing that changed the color of dreams. At the ranch gate, Sam paused, fingers fumbling with the old latch. His hands, though twisted by age and work, moved with quiet purpose. He pushed the gate open, its hinges squealing in the stillness. Ash stepped through, first pausing just inside the threshold, as if waiting for Jack to follow. Jack did, brushing the post with his fingertips, a gesture almost unconscious, half afraid, half remembering. Sam entered last. And this time, unlike all the years before, he left the gate wide open behind them. The townspeople didn't step forward, didn't try to cross the invisible line, but neither did they turn away. They stood as witnesses, as congregation, their silence more solemn than any sermon. By the fence, old Mr. Russell. The tailor muttered to the woman at his side, "I never thought I'd see Jack Callahan set foot back here. Least not without looking to run again." She shook her head, smiling through the ache in her eyes. Some burdens only a horse can carry home. Inside the yard, the sense of return grew real. Sam made his way up onto the porch and lowered himself into the same wooden chair he'd always used his body, sighing with relief, his breath coming slow, not from exhaustion, but from something gentler like peace. He propped his cane against the rail, closed his eyes for a long moment, and listened to the sounds of home. Jack, lingering at the fence, felt something loosen in his chest. The old ache was still there, but so was something new, lighter, sharper, and strange. He pushed open the gate to Ash's paddock, his movements almost hesitant, like a man waking from a dream. Ash watched him approach, eyes dark and clear. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other, two survivors measuring trust. Without a word, Jack picked up the dented metal bucket by the barn door, filled it from the pump, and poured fresh water into the trough. Ash dipped his head, drinking deeply. The Mustang's ears flicked in contentment, a tiny, unmistakable nod. No one told Jack what to do. No one asked him why he bothered. For the first time in years, no one in Lone Ridge looked at him as a stranger. The last light of sunset pooled in the windows of the house, and the Callahan ranch glowed softly as it always had at dusk. Nothing much had changed: the warped boards on the porch, the sagging roof, the stubborn weeds by the well. But inside those boundaries, the world had shifted. What was different now was not the place, but the people father, son, and horse each remade, by a forgiveness too simple to say out loud. As Jack finished his work, he looked up at the horizon, then over at Sam. Their eyes met just briefly. It wasn't a smile exactly, but it wasn't distance either. It was a recognition, the kind that only those who have almost lost everything can share. Ash finished with his drink, turned in a slow circle, and lay down in the dirt legs, folded neatly beneath him, eyes closing with perfect trust. He was home too. At last, the ranch was not a battlefield, but a haven. The silence inside and out was not emptiness now. It was respect, a sacred hush that wrapped itself around the house and the town and every soul who bore witness. In that silence, old hurts might finally heal. In that silence, something lost had come home. Night had come quietly to Lone Ridge, draping the old ranch in a cloak of gentle gray. Above the Callahan house, the first stars blinked into view, soft, scattered, and impossibly far away. The breeze moved lightly through the cottonwoods, just enough to rattle a loose shingle on the roof and set the porch swing creaking. It was the kind of night made for stories, for healing, for the slow, honest breathing that can only happen when anger has ebbed and silence feels safe. On the weathered front porch, two men sat side by side, father and son, each wrapped in their own thoughts, yet closer than they had been in decades. There was no distance between them now, not truly. Sam had a wool blanket tucked over his legs, his cane propped within arm's reach. Jack poured tea from an old metal kettle into two enamel cups, one chipped at the rim. He handed the better cup to his father, without a word, keeping the rough-edged one for himself. The air between them was calm, almost sacred. In that quiet, the simple act of sharing tea spoke volumes. Sam took a slow sip, eyes scanning the horizon, where the last hints of dusk lingered. He cleared his throat, voice gravelly but honest. "You ever hear the story of how I met your mother?" He began, his gaze drifting somewhere far beyond the porch. Jack glanced over, half smiling. "Don't think so." Sam's mouth twisted the ghost of a grin beneath his gray mustache. "I was stationed at the field hospital after that spring flood, back when your granddad's barn still had a roof." She marched right into the tent, slipped on a puddle, and nearly crashed into the medics. Still managed to scold the doctor for not washing his hands. Jack let out a surprised laugh, soft, genuine, a sound Sam hadn't heard in so many years. It caught him off guard. Encouraged, Sam pressed on his fingers, drumming lightly against the armrest, in time with memory. She once spent her whole savings on a scrawny chicken just so I'd have something warm in my belly before heading out again. Didn't even like chicken much herself, but she pretended. Jack's grin faded into something softer, more wistful. He looked down at his tea, then up at Sam. She loved you. Anyone could see it. A pause. Sam's voice turned quiet. I never told you stories like that when you were little. Figured you didn't need to hear them. Maybe I thought you wouldn't care. Jack stared into the dark, then shook his head. I needed them, Dad. I always did. The wind grew a little stronger, threading cool fingers through their hair. Jack set his cup carefully on the porch, folding his hands together. He looked past the yard where the lanterns in the barn cast a faint glow over Ash's silhouette. It took him a moment to find the words, but when he spoke, they were steady and sure. When I was a kid, all I wanted was for you to, I don't know, to put a hand on my shoulder. Or just say, "Good job, Jack. You did well." Jack's voice trembled with the weight of confession. That race at the fair, you remember, I ran so hard my lungs burned. Mom hugged me, cried even. You just nodded and walked away. He blinked fast, fighting off tears he thought he'd buried years ago. Sometimes I wished I was Ash. At least you'd pat his head. At least he got to feel you were proud. Sam turned, searching his son's face, really seeing him maybe, for the first time since Jack was small. The old man didn't reach for words. He understood finally that apologies could never cover so many years, so much longing. Instead, he reached out, he placed his thin, knotted hand on Jack's shoulder and let it rest there, steady, warm, and unashamed. Jack didn't look over, but his eyes slid shut, his whole body relaxing by degrees, as if he'd finally let go of a breath held for decades. That touch, more than any phrase, was the answer he'd needed all his life. Below the porch, on the patch of dirt nearest the steps, Ash lay curled in the dust, head on his forelegs, ears pointed toward the house, but eyes half closed. He was not penned in his stall tonight. Instead, he'd chosen to rest where he could keep watch over the two men, his presence a silent benediction. Each slow, even breath from the old Mustang was a promise: you are safe. You are home. I am here. No one spoke for a long while. It was a silence that asked nothing and forgave everything, the hush of wounds finally finding the air they needed to close. The sky deepened to indigo then, almost black, and the porch light flickered on, sending moths dancing in circles. Sam shifted, drawing the blanket higher on his legs. We still have some time, you know, he said, voice low and rough. Not a lot, but real time all the same. Jack looked up at the stars, sparse but bright. For the first time, I'm not afraid of it running out. Sam smiled, the lines in his face deepening with something like relief. Me, neither, son. Not anymore. Their shadows, thrown by the porch light, leaned together on the floorboards, long and close, the way old wounds and new hope sometimes blend when you finally let the past take its seat beside you. Inside the house was dark and still. Outside the world was quiet. The wind moved softly through the grass, and Ash, ever vigilant, sighed contentedly, a guardian spirit in the form of an old Mustang watching over the men he'd helped to save. For the first time in so many years, the Callahan house felt truly like a home, not just for sleeping, but for belonging. The word home was not spoken, but it glowed all around them, filling every crack, every quiet moment, every shared cup of tea. And as night took its throne over Lone Ridge, father and son sat on the porch together at peace. Not because nothing hurt anymore, but because at last they'd found a way to let the hurt be heard. Dawn came quietly over the hills of Lone Ridge, the first gold brushing the weathered roof of Callahan Ranch, with the promise of something softer, something begun again. There was dew on the fence rails cool in the pale light, and the ranch so long a place of silence and regret, breathed out as if at last it dared to hope. It was the kind of morning where even the birds seemed to pause, waiting to see if the peace would last. Jack Callahan was awake before the roosters up, while the stars still clung to the sky. He moved through the quiet house boots, barely scuffing the floor, gathering what he needed: the old hammer, a battered axe, a coil of hemp rope, a few worn planks from the shed. He didn't know quite what shape his labor would take. He only knew he needed to build something that would last a mark on the earth, not of anger or loss, but of gratitude. This was not like all the mornings before, when Jack had wondered only about escape. This time he carried his tools with a new steadiness, a new sense of belonging. Sam stood in the doorway of the house, blanket around his shoulders, watching his son cross the yard. He did not call out, did not ask what Jack was doing. He simply leaned against the frame, the lines of worry in his face, softening into something closer to peace, or maybe wonder. For once, he didn't need to have all the answers. It was enough to witness this quiet beginning. Jack chose a spot in the open yard where the earth was packed and red, and the sunrise could be seen clear over the hills. He set down his bundle of stones, weathered and gray, hauled from the edge of the property. He stacked them carefully, one after another, in a half circle, a kind of embrace, rough but deliberate. In the center, he planted a wooden post, stripping it of splinters, binding it tight with old rope. At the top, he fastened an iron horseshoe ashes, the one he'd kept from the time the Mustang had been lamed and healed. That shoe had once meant loss, a mark of pain. But now, it crowned the altar as a symbol of survival. Jack knelt beside the post and drew his pocket knife, its blade dulled by years of hard use. With slow, determined cuts, he carved words into the wood plane, unadorned the truth as best he could give it ash. Keeper of life. He pressed hard, each letter a silent thank you, each groove a promise that would not fade with the next rain. No photographs, no garlands, no grand words. The altar was honest as the hands that built it, as honest as the horse whose spirit it honored. By the time the sun had fully climbed the sky, the air was fragrant with wildflowers and baking bread. One by one, the people of Lone Ridge arrived, drawn by something they didn't quite name. No one had been invited. No one needed an explanation. A small girl, hair braided and feet bare, came first, clutching a fistful of bright yellow blooms picked from the banks of the stream. She placed them gently at the foot of the altar and then stepped back, biting her lip eyes wide with reverence. The town baker followed, her apron still dusted with flour, laying 2 warm loaves on the stones bread for sharing, for blessing. An old man came with a lantern, its glass cracked, but inside a single candle burned bright. He set it down beside the other offerings, lighting it with a match struck slow and careful, as if the very act were prayer. No one asked what the altar was for. No one gave a speech or sang or tried to lead the others. They simply gathered, offering what they could: flowers, food, flame, a patch of embroidered cloth from Miss Ellie, who laid her hand-stitched square along the rim of the stones. She bowed her head as she did it, her words soft, but carrying in the morning stillness not just a horse, a soul that walks on iron shoes. The crowd grew, filling the yard, but never crowding. There was no talking above a whisper. People placed their tokens in silence, forming a circle that echoed the altar's embrace. They understood, every one of them, that something precious had been nearly lost, and only by grace, by the courage and heart of a horse, had it been saved. Jack stood back, hands, dirty shoulders straight. For a moment, his gaze caught his father's across the ring of faces. Sam's eyes shone with pride, bright despite the years. He nodded once, a gesture that said more than any word that let Jack know at last he was seen, was welcomed, was home. And then with a quiet that settled on the skin like dew, Ash came forward. He had been grazing near the barn, but now he moved drawn by the hush of the crowd and the call of something he could feel, but not name. His hooves pressed softly into the earth as he walked one step another, deliberate and steady. No one beckoned him. No one led the way. Ash came because he belonged, because the altar was for him and for everything he had given. When he reached the stones, Ash paused, lowering his head until his muzzle nearly touched the carved words. He held there motionless, breathing slow, the candle flame trembling in the morning breeze. The whole yard seemed to hold its breath, as if the world had stopped spinning just for a heartbeat. A sudden wind swept down from the hills, tugging at hats, lifting hair, making the flames shudder and leap. It brushed across every face, every bowed head, gentle as a hand. In that moment, Sam whispered almost to himself, but everyone could hear, he knows. He understands more than any of us. No one doubted it. The silence was profound, not empty, but full of shared wordless prayer. Old men who had once scoffed at Sam's crazy loyalty now bowed their heads, hats pressed to their chests. Children who had played jokes about the old man and his horse now stood still, eyes round, as if learning the meaning of respect for the first time. Jack's hand rested on Ash's neck, steady and calm. Sam's gaze was warm, unguarded. Between the three of them, a triangle forged in pain and mercy, there flowed a current of understanding. It was a bond neither wounds nor years could break. No one called Ash just a horse again, not after that day. From then on, everyone in Lone Ridge spoke his name with reverence, like speaking of a living legend or a friend who had brought a family back from the edge. There were no sermons, no music, no ritual beyond the heartbeat of the gathered people. But as the sun climbed higher, pouring gold over the red earth and the altar of stone, it was clear to everyone that something sacred had happened. Forgiveness had found its shape in wood and iron. Gratitude had rooted itself in the soil. The community, once divided by silence and pride, stood as one, healed, if only for this moment, by the spirit of a Mustang who knew what it meant to stand between life and loss. The late afternoon sun slanted low over Callahan Ranch, setting the world ablaze in a deep golden hue. The last of the townsfolk had quietly made their way back to Lone Ridge, leaving behind an unusual silence, a gentle hush full of possibility. It was the kind of peace that only comes after a long storm, when all debts have been paid, and every soul at last breathes freely. Jack remained behind, standing before the simple stone altar in the yard. The air was still, save for a breeze that ran soft fingers through his hair and tugged at his worn shirt. For the first time since his return, he did not look at the earth as if he were trespassing on someone else's life. He did not hang his head in shame, nor did he throw his shoulders back in defiance as if daring the world to judge him. He simply stood solid, unguarded, open to the land and its promise. He placed his hand on the rough timber just beneath the letters he himself had carved, Ash, keeper of life. The wood was cool beneath his palm, but it hummed with the memory of everything that had come before: loss and fury, regret and forgiveness, and the strange healing magic of a single horse who had bridged a gulf neither father nor son could cross alone. Jack closed his eyes and let the moment settle in his bones. His voice came low and certain, not for anyone's ears but his own, and for whatever spirits watched over Lone Ridge. "I'll keep this place," he whispered. "No selling, no running. I won't go back to who I was before." He opened his eyes, the sunlight now painting everything in a fierce amber glow. The breeze picked up again, playful and gentle, as if carrying a blessing from somewhere far beyond the hills. Behind him, Sam made his way across the yard. The old man leaned heavily on his cane, but there was strength in his gait, a kind of quiet pride. He paused behind his son, studying the younger man's shoulders, as the way Jack's hand rested so firmly on the altar. For a long, still moment, neither spoke. Then Sam reached out, placed his weathered hand on Jack's shoulder, steady grounding full of faith. The gesture was both an ending and a beginning, both a benediction and a charge. Sam's voice was deep and measured each word chosen and weighted. "I forgive you," he said. "But you've got to live that forgiveness, son. You owe it to yourself and to this land." Jack turned, eyes bright, but not ashamed. The two men faced each other, not as adversaries, or even as a father and a lost son, but as men who had earned their second chance. There was no handshake, no embrace, just the touch of Sam's hand on Jack's shoulder and a shared sense of purpose that needed no further ceremony. They stood that way for a time, letting the new shape of their bond settle into the soft soil, their shadows stretching across the earth like threads, weaving a tapestry whole again. A few steps away, Fort Spalfjarts, Ash the Mustang, whose presence had kept both men anchored, walked quietly toward the altar. He circled once, then, with the dignified slowness of an old soldier, folded his legs beneath him, and lay down. His head rested near the base of the stone and timber, the soft breath from his nostrils stirring the wildflowers at its foot. There was nothing of exhaustion in the way Ash settled himself. It was a posture of deep, earned rest, the kind that comes only when a task is not merely finished, but completed with honor. His ears, always alert, twitched toward the men, but his eyes had closed halfway. He gave a long, slow exhale, a sigh that seemed to empty the weight of all those years of vigilance, of being the silent bridge between wounded souls. Neither Jack nor Sam spoke. They simply watched Ash, feeling the quiet as a kind of music, an anthem of peace sung without words. The sun, now lowering fast, set the world ablaze with color. It caught the tips of the pines at the edge of the ranch, igniting them with a light that was almost holy. Every leaf, every blade of grass, every stone on the altar glowed, as if lit from within. The shadows of the three-man son and horse stretched long across the yard, merging into one indistinct golden silhouette that blurred the boundaries between flesh and spirit, past and future. Above them, a flock of birds wheeled through the sky, moving in silence, not breaking the sacred hush of the moment. Their wings caught the light, casting ripples on the air, and for an instant time itself seemed to hold its breath. Nothing moved but the breeze. Nothing sounded but the faint sigh of Ash. Sam broke the silence, first voice low and full of awe. "This land saved me once," he murmured, not really to Jack, but to the sky, to the ground, to the ghosts that lingered on both. Now it saved us all. Jack shook his head, a wry smile twitching at the corner of his mouth. "Not the land," he said softly, "but the horse and what he guarded for us." Sam's eyes gleamed the last fire of daylight, caught in their gray depths. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it's not the land or even the past. Maybe it's what we finally learned to carry together." There was nothing more to say. No one needed to speak of miracles or prayers of heaven or fate. In that moment, as the last gold spilled over the red earth, the truth was plain and wordless. Three souls each, broken and mended in their own way, breathing together in the peace they had fought so hard to find. There were no scars that could be seen, but the pain was real. There was no priest to offer blessing, no church bell to toll. But the blessing was in the wind, in the dirt, in the silence. For the first time in memory, there was no war, only peace. No anger, only acceptance. No more leaving, only return. As the sun dropped below the horizon, the ranch seemed to glow from within its battered fences and sagging roof, radiant as a cathedral. The world was remade not through thunder or revelation, but through the quiet, persistent work of forgiveness, of staying, of choosing hope. Ash stirred, lifted his head one last time, as if to check on his two humans. Jack knelt beside him, hand resting on the horse's neck. "You did, good old friend," he whispered. "We'll be all right. You can rest now." Sam stood over them both, his face aglow, with the reflection of sunset and love. For the first time, there was no command, no duty, only gratitude. In that final light, the three shadows on the ground became indistinguishable, braided together as one. The pain and anger and years of distance melted away, leaving only the warmth of a new beginning. Somewhere a bell rang in the town, distant and slow. Night was coming, but it was no longer a threat. It was a soft blanket drawing the family father-son and the spirit of a Mustang into a single breath, a single heart. On the wind, you might have heard a promise whispered as gentle and true as a prayer. We are home. We are whole. We begin again.
Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us.